Hello, and welcome to Myth Madness. Last episode, I began covering stories from the Shahnameh. This Persian epic poem was composed in 1010 AD and is an excellent source of Persian mythology. I told the stories of two legendary kings, Hoshang and Tammuz, and how they taught humans different things to survive, and also fought against the Deevs, demons and servants of the evil spirit Ahriman. The two legendary kings successfully defeated the Deevs and made the world safe for the early humans. Although Ahriman was eventually able to get the better of Tammuz. That king was killed, and his body was swallowed whole by the evil spirit. Fortunately, a while after, Tammuz's son, Jamshid, retrieved his father's body by tricking Ahriman and pulling it out of the evil spirit's bowels. Gross. That incident was only a brief introduction to Jamshid. He is a very significant figure in Persian mythology, and probably the most important of the early mythological kings. Jamshid's stories are covered in the Shahnameh, but he also appears in the earlier Zoroastrian literature as well. In this episode, I will talk about both. But before we begin, a quick reminder about an important concept: far. Far is commonly translated as glory, fortune, or radiance. Starting with the first king, Geomart, all of the mythological kings I've talked about so far were all said to possess far. It was a blessing granted to them by the creator or Mazd, and showed that they had a right to rule over the world. They glowed with this blessing, something like halos in Christian art. However, this is only a superficial understanding of far. The word is more properly translated as fulfilling one's own work. It was not simply a supernatural glowing granted to someone because Ormazd liked them or that they had the right ancestors. Far came with responsibilities, and having it granted to you meant you were completing the very specific duties that came from your social position, especially with respect to kings. This is a very important point, and it is crucial to understanding Jamshid. His story is fundamentally a tragedy, and his actions will lead to the loss of his far. In the Shahnameh, following the death of Tammuz, Jamshid ascended to his father's throne. Thanks to the efforts of Hoshang and Tammuz, there were no longer any conflicts with the Deevs. Jamshid was king of the 7 climes, the 7 continents the Persians divided the world into. He ruled the world, and the birds, mammals, Deevs, and Peris, another mythical creature similar to fairies, obeyed all his commands. Jamshid shone with the holy far that represented Ormazd's blessing. His royal throne also glowed with his power, and the world was wealthy. Like with Hoshang and Tammuz, Jamshid was a teacher of humanity and a builder of culture and civilization. He learned how to melt iron ore and taught people how to shape it into helmets, chainmail, armor, swords, tools, and horseshoes. For 50 years, Jamshid filled storehouses with stockpiles of armor and weapons, which should probably suggest to you that Jamshid didn't think the good times were going to last forever. Once the storehouses were full, Jamshid moved on to a new activity. For the next 50 years, he spent the time teaching his subjects to make clothes. Before this, they only wore animal skins. But Jamshid taught people how to spin thread, weave cloth, dye fabric, and sew. They used these new skills to make luxurious clothes for feasts, and practical clothes for working. With the people trained in the arts of civilization, and the world home to more of their number, Jamshid then busied himself with a much-needed social reorganization. For the next 50 years, Jamshid divided humans into different professions. First, he selected those who spend their life in prayer and worship. Jamshid sent these priests, magi, and hermits to live in the mountains. There, they could spend their time at the holy shrines and sit in quiet contemplation. Next, Jamshid assembled ranks of the strongest to be well-trained warriors. He tasked a third group with working in the fields, irrigating crops, and sowing and reaping grain. This group had the crucial task of feeding everyone, but would always struggle to receive anyone's thanks. And finally, Jamshid assigned those humans who would be craftsmen. They would create the goods other humans used to live productive and enjoyable lives. With the humans divided into 4 social classes and given their responsibilities, Jamshid needed places for these civilized humans to live. So Jamshid then turned to the Deves under his command. He ordered the Deves to mix clay with water and pack them into bricks. The Deves set to work building foundations of stone and plaster. They used the intricacies of geometry to make fabulous structures with the bricks. Public bathhouses, castles, palaces, walls. Soon the world was dotted with Deve-made cities for Jamshid's subjects to live in. With that accomplished, Jamshid then had some of his subjects mine jewels and precious metals from the rocks of the world. From this work he built a vast treasury of rubies, amber, gold, silver, and other gemstones. He introduced his people to perfumes and scented woods. He discovered cures for illnesses and taught people how to live healthy. He developed new designs of ships so he could travel quickly from country to country, all across his large domain. In all of this, Jamshid was aided in his knowledge of magic. He revealed his secrets and inventions to the humans who lived under him. When all these wonderful things were done, Jamshid desired to climb higher. He used his powers and skills to construct a magnificent throne, studded with the finest gems. Jamshid had the Deves, with their own powers of flight, raise his throne high above the earth. In the heavens, seated on his throne, Jamshid's far shined like the sun. There, Jamshid rested from his hard work establishing civilization. He called for a great feast with wine and music. The world's inhabitants scattered jewels on the ground to honor him. They called this a new day, and according to the Shahnameh, this was the first time the Nowruz festival, an important Iranian holiday for the new year, was held. For the next 300 years, the world was a happy and peaceful place. Death was unknown. Humans did not suffer. The Deves did not cause trouble. They served as Jamshid's slaves and obeyed him. The land was filled with laughter and music. Sugar, spice, and everything nice. But when the evil spirit Ahriman is loose in the world, the good times cannot go on forever. One day, Jamshid summoned his army commanders and advisors. The men showed up and stood at attention, arranged in their organized ranks. But they did not know the reason for the summons. Why had Jamshid called them? The world was in the midst of a golden age. There was no war. There was no conflict. Jamshid finally arrived. He told them he knew of no one in the whole world who was his equal. It was he, Jamshid, who had given the arts of civilization to humankind. It was he, Jamshid, who had taught them how to live. No one who had ever sat on the throne of the 7 climes could compare with him. Surely he must rank higher than anyone. Surely he was just as great as the Creator. With that display of arrogance and hubris, the great Jamshid finally lost the holy far. His days were darkened and his glowing splendor dimmed. All across the world, his subjects began to whisper that he had lost the blessing and right to rule bestowed by the Creator. Murmurings of rebellion spread, and soon Jamshid's fall would come. So that is the story of Jamshid as presented in the Shahnameh. Like with the other early kings I covered in past episodes, Gayamart, Hoshang, Tamaraz, a version of Jamshid also goes back to more ancient days, and is referred to several times in the Zoroastrian Avesta religious texts. This more ancient version of Jamshid is called Yima. This Yima was a son of the ancient Iranian sun god Viuanvant. Like the later Jamshid, Yima was one of the first kings and ruled the world during a golden age. However, the Vendidad, a specific collection of texts within the Avesta, provides some additional details on how that came to be. As it happened, the creator Ormazd first offered Yima the job of memorizing all of Ormazd's teachings, practicing them in his own life, and then teaching them to the world's inhabitants. In other words, Ormazd asked Yima if he would be the god's prophet, but Yima, perhaps surprisingly, said, "Thanks, but no thanks." So Ormazd offered him a different job, to be the protector of all living things. This time, Yima accepted and promised the creator that as long as he was in command, the world would be perfect and without sickness or death. When Yima accepted the job of being the world's guardian, and thus also being its king, Ormazd gave Yima 2 gifts. The first item was a cattle prod, and the second item was something called a subra. The meaning of this word is not clear. It was possibly some kind of pickaxe, or some other tool for working with dirt. The Avesta tells how King Yima made the world immortal through his sacrifices to the creator. He provided meat for people to eat. This strengthened their bodies and made them live forever. Under Yima's rule, humanity prospered. Temples with sacred flames sacred to Ormazd were built all across the land. The Devas, the Avestan term for Deves, were prevented from wreaking havoc and doing whatever they wanted. In the Shahnameh, we get a great list of various arts of civilization that Jamshid taught humanity. The Avesta does not provide that same level of detail. It does say that Ormazd showed Yima how to make bricks, and then he presumably taught this to his human subjects. But in the Shahnameh, this was something Jamshid ordered the Deves to do. The Avesta dates back millennia, but later religious texts provide a description of Yima Jamshid's golden age that is more similar to what's in the Shahnameh. The Rivayats are correspondences between Zoroastrian communities in Iran and other communities that migrated to India after the Arab conquest of Persia in the 6th century AD. These Rivayats are basically questions and answers that passed between the two groups' religious leaders. So, naturally, they provide great details that go beyond what's in the Avesta. The Rivayats use the Jamshid name instead of Yima. They have Jamshid teach humans weaving, how to make clothes, make weapons, sow crops, and organize society. So, similar to what's in the Shahnameh. The Rivayats also give a location for Ormazd's offer of kingship to Jamshid. The creator apparently summoned him to the top of Alborz, a mythical mountain. After Jamshid accepted the world's guardianship, he descended from the mountain. When he came down, it looked like there were 2 suns in the sky. Why this image? Well, remember that Jamshid received the far from Ormazd to show his right to rule? It looked like there were 2 suns in the sky because one of them was Jamshid. His far just shined so bright. The Rivayats also provide another detail about how King Jamshid stopped the Deves from causing problems. He apparently crossed the Chinwad Bridge, which separates the land of the living from the land of the dead in Zoroastrian cosmology. And there, Jamshid closed the door to hell. With the door closed, the evil spirit Ahriman and his Dev followers could not come to Earth and cause people to die. So there's some additional interesting details there. However, the core of the story is consistent with what's in the Shahnameh. The key takeaways here are Yima Jamshid was offered kingship by Ormazd. His rule was a golden age, and he served as a teacher for humanity. The Avestan Vendidad and the later Rivayats also both describe how under Yima Jamshid's rule, the populations of humans and the cattle they tended increased. They grew so much that after 300 years, the earth became too full for them. At this point, Ormazd appeared to Yima and told him it was time to use his 2 royal tools to expand the earth. Yima used the tools, and the earth became twice as large. But this was really only a temporary solution. The good times continued, and the population of the earth grew until the world was too full once more. Eventually, Ormazd called Yima to a meeting of gods and men. For some unknown reason, the earth could not be resized again. Instead, it was decided that the population of the earth needed to be reduced. This would be accomplished through a series of harsh winters, followed by a flood when the snow melted. But Ormazd did not want all of the humans to die, so he instructed Yima in how to build something called a var. The meaning of var is not super clear, but think of it as a special fortress or enclosure. Some people even think it was supposed to be a big freshwater lake. Whatever it actually was, Yima's Var is going to serve the same purpose as Noah's Ark in the Bible. Pairs of creatures were kept inside of it. After the world was decimated by the winters and flood, the land was repopulated from the creatures held safe inside the Var. Besides serving as an ark for animals, the Rivayats also give another use for the Var. Some Sassanid Persian sources give a twin sister for Jamshid named Jameh, and the Rivayats do this too. At one point after the flood, the two siblings went to hide together in the Var, and could not be found. The evil spirit Ahriman guessed where they were hiding and sent two disguised male and female Deevs, a male Deev and a female Peri, to find them. When they found Jamshid and Jameh, the disguised Deevs claimed they were fleeing from Ahriman's followers, and suggested that the four of them should live together and get married. Jamshid and Jameh agreed, and took the two newcomers into the Var. Jamshid married the female Deev, and Jameh had the male Deev as her husband. According to the Zoroastrian Bundahishni text, from these two couples, monkeys, bears, and all sorts of other harmful creatures were born. The Rivayats go on to say that one day Jamshid and the male Deev got drunk. So Jameh and the female Deev switched clothes, and Jameh pretended to be her sister-in-law in order to sleep with her twin brother Jamshid. Pretty freaky, but for some reason this caused the two demons to be banished back to hell. The ancient Zoroastrians did have a special type of incestuous marriage that was considered sacred. Historians know it was practiced by the Achaemenid Persian kings before Alexander the Great conquered Persia. Perhaps this story is alluding to this type of marriage. Nevertheless, the double matching of Jamshid and Jameh with the two Deevs is viewed as a bad thing. In Persian mythology, in the dark times before the prophet Zarathustra began his teachings, Devas and Deevs walked the earth in the shape of men. They abducted women and raped them whenever they wanted. They seduced women through trickery. In the mythology, when the world was said to be in a bad state, these kinds of bad interactions between humans and Deevs are unfortunately common. With that said, it should come as no surprise that the story of Jamshid and Jameh getting married to demons is supposed to have occurred after Jamshid lost the holy Far and Ormazd's blessing. So what then do the Zoroastrian religious texts say about Jamshid's fall from grace? Quick reminder, the Shahnameh says Jamshid became arrogant with all of his power and claimed to be an equal to the creator. The Rivayats say much the same thing, that Jamshid lied about being the creator, and how this was instigated by, you guessed it, the evil spirit Ahriman. The earlier Avestan Yashts also say it was because Yima Jamshid lied, although the Yashts don't really say what he lied about. The Rivayats also provide another detail, that Jamshid was destined to end up this way, and that his first mistake was refusing Ormazd's offer to be the creator's prophet and spread his teachings. This refusal marked him for a later doom. This episode is focused on Jamshid's rule, his hubris, and his loss of the creator's blessing. The king's actual fall is part of a more complicated story, so that will wait until the next episode of the pod. But besides that, there are some other things about Jamshid that make him an interesting mythical hero, which I want to cover right now. For example, since he was a great king, you can imagine he had a fairly large collection of treasures, the kind of treasures that other men couldn't get. Treasures he could use to work magic, for instance. One such treasure is the Jami Jam, or the Cup of Jamshid. A magnificent item, it was described as 7-ringed, whatever that means. This cup, or chalice, was supposed to be passed down within the Persian royal family, and it often appears in examples of Persian folklore. The Cup of Jamshid had 2 special abilities. The first one was that it contained an elixir that healed or bestowed immortality. This makes the cup similar to the Christian Holy Grail. In the Shahnameh, the cup is never explicitly used for this purpose, but maybe, just maybe, drinking from the cup was what gave Jamshid and some of the mythic Persian kings who came after him their incredibly long lifespans. Jamshid himself lived for 900 years. The second power of the Cup of Jamshid was scrying. By looking down into the reflections created by the liquid inside, the owner of the cup could observe anything in the 7 climes, the world of Persian mythology, that they wanted to. In the Shahnameh, the cup is used exactly for this reason by a descendant of Jamshid's, a different king of Iran named Khosrow. This king was probably the owner of the cup in the oldest mythic tradition, but his story is one for another day. The other fabulous treasure owned by Jamshid was a ring. This ring was described by Persian poets as having a large green gemstone, but it was also said to bear a special inscription that gave it magic powers. A moment ago, I spoke about Jamshid's var, a special enclosure to save pairs of humans and animals from a devastating winters and flood. I noted that sounded a lot like Noah and his ark from the Abrahamic religions. Medieval Muslims recognized this too. After the Arab invasion of Persia, medieval Muslims inherited the rich mythological tradition of the ancient Persians. They didn't completely throw it out. Instead, they adapted it to Islam by making connections between the Iranian stories and the stories of the Quran and the Jewish Torah. Others claimed the Iranians credited their own kings with what Abrahamic prophets had actually done. Besides Noah, Jamshid was linked to the legendary Solomon, although their similarities are more extensive but also more vague than the ones between Noah and Jamshid. This is where Jamshid's magic ring comes in. In Jewish and Islamic traditions, Solomon was a king of the Israelites and a wise prophet. Like Jamshid, he had a very productive and wise reign. Both performed miracles to benefit their subjects. Both of them had a magic throne that could move. Solomon was a pious king and ruled according to the will of God. Similarly, Jamshid's divine blessing gave him his right to rule. One thing Solomon was especially celebrated for was his control over the world's demons, called jinn by the Arabs. Solomon enslaved the jinn using a magic ring and then commanded the demons to build things for him. Jamshid also ordered demons to build things, and he also possessed a magic ring. Although in Persian mythology, the enslavement of the demons is more properly achieved by Jamshid's father, Tamuraz, and it's not clear if Jamshid's ring was what gave him the power to command demons, or just had other magical abilities. What's more, the Solomon legends feature a story about the king losing his power. The Quran says that Solomon was once punished by God for tolerating the worship of idols and thus lost his throne. Other Jewish and Muslim sources elaborate on this. They say Solomon's magic ring was stolen by Asmodeus, one of his demon subjects. The demon used the ring to whisk Solomon a far distance away and then rule the land as an impostor. Eventually, Solomon repents, returns, gets his ring back, and banishes Asmodeus either by turning him into a rock, chaining him up, or throwing him into the sea. This story has some vague parallels to Jamshid's fall. Both Jamshid and Solomon offended the Creator and lost the source of their power, their divine blessings. But Solomon also lost the physical source of his power, the magic ring. Both kings were replaced by a demonic monstrous entity who rules in their place. Asmodeus replaces Solomon, and a monstrous being eventually replaces Jamshid as king of Persia, which I will talk about more in the next episode. Solomon is sent far away by the demon, while Jamshid flees far away to escape his monstrous enemy's wrath. A lot of parallels to think about. The big difference, though, is their fates. Jamshid never regains the divine blessing, and thus never gets his throne back. Solomon does. The common elements in these stories meant that by the 14th century, Iranian poets treated Jamshid and Solomon as the same person. For example, the Quran contains a story that one day Solomon led his army into a valley. An ant saw them coming, and warned the other ants to watch out, or Solomon's men would crush them. Solomon, who knew the language of ants, heard her. He then had his men avoid marching over the ant hills. The Iranian poet Hafez, who lived in the late 1300s, retells this story, but uses Jamshid's name instead of Solomon's. However, for what it's worth, while poets often conflated the two legendary kings, in the histories written by medieval Islamic scholars, this is not the case. Some of them even outright rejected any link between the two. Connections with Jewish and Islamic figures aside, in Persian mythology, Jamshid was the king of the world and ruled over Deevs, Peris, birds, land animals, and humans. He was surrounded by a glowing halo, called the Far, which showed his divine right to rule. Jamshid's reign was a golden age, and he was considered a patron of the arts and an inventor of numerous technologies, such as winemaking, weapons, clothes, medicine, and social classes and laws. There is even a story of him saving the world's inhabitants from disaster. However, eventually, all of this goes to Jamshid's head, and he becomes too proud of his accomplishments, possibly lying about the source of his power. Offending the creator meant the loss of his Far. The result of that is that after a reign of 700 years, his subjects turn against him, and Jamshid will later die. The next episode will cover the events just before Jamshid's final removal from the kingship, and who, or what, replaced him. So stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this episode, get out your phone, yes, right now, and send the link to one friend you think would enjoy it too. As always, thank you for listening.